Nobody told me about this. Not a single teacher, not one dusty textbook stacked on my desk through 4 years of studying Southeast Asian history. I stumbled upon it sideways, late at night, reading a Korean manuscript translation I had no business reading. And there it was. A name, a place, a kingdom rooted in the Philippine archipelago, sitting quietly inside a Korean royal genealogy like it had always belonged there. If stories like this pull you in, consider subscribing to Echoes of Ancients. We dig into the forgotten. We stay now. Let me take you somewhere unexpected. The Samguk Yusa, the Samguk Sagi. These are Korean historical compilations, sacred to Korean heritage, guarded and studied for centuries. They chronicle the rise and fall of dynasties, the marriages of kings, the bloodlines that shaped a peninsula. Within these records and within the genealogical traditions of the Gimhae Kim clan, one of Korea's largest family lineages, there appears a princess. Her name, rendered in Korean, is Heo Hwang-ok. She arrived by sea. She married King Suro of the Gaya Confederacy around the 1st century of the Common Era. She claimed her homeland was a distant kingdom called Ayutha. Ayutha? For decades, many scholars linked this name to Ayodhya in India. That was the comfortable interpretation, the familiar bridge between South Asia and Korea. But a quieter thread of inquiry, championed by certain Filipino historians and cultural researchers, asks a different question. Could Ayutha refer not to the Indian subcontinent, but to something closer to the islands now called the Philippines? Before we chase that thread, we need to pause. We need to understand why this question even matters. And to do that, I want to tell you about a boy in Manila. He was 12. Let's say the year was 1989. His school curriculum taught him that Philippine history began with Magellan's arrival in 1521. Everything before that was fog, tribal, unwritten, primitive. The word primitive sat in his textbook like a lock on a door. Behind that door, centuries of maritime trade, gold craftsmanship, written scripts, and diplomatic exchange were sealed away. Invisible. That boy grew up believing his ancestors had no civilization worth naming. Millions of Filipino children absorbed the same lesson. This is the wound the Ayutha question touches, not just a footnote in a Korean genealogy. A mirror? A chance to see a reflection that colonial education smashed and swept aside. So let us return to the princess. Heo Hwang-ok's story survives in the Garakgukgi, a narrative embedded within the Samguk Yusa, compiled by the Buddhist monk Irian in the 13th century. According to this account, she sailed from a faraway land, carrying treasures and attendants, and presented herself to King Suro as his bride. The text describes her kingdom as prosperous, established, and sovereign. The marriage was not a rescue, not charity, a union between equals. The word Ayutha has been the crux of every debate since. Mainstream Korean scholarship generally favors the Indian Ayodhya connection. A monument in Ayodhya, India, even commemorates the link, and Korean tourists visit it. Diplomatic gestures between India and South Korea have reinforced this narrative. The connection is politically convenient, culturally tidy. It fits a map people already accept, truly accept. But maps lie, they always have. Here's where the nested story deepens. In 2016, a group of researchers associated with the University of the Philippines and certain Korean cultural organizations revisited the linguistic trail. They pointed out that Ayutha, as a place name, doesn't survive in Indian geography with a clear, unbroken connection to a maritime kingdom capable of sending a princess across open ocean. Ayodhya sits deep in the Gangetic Plain, landlocked, hundreds of miles from the nearest coast. Meanwhile, the Philippines in the 1st century was not the void that Spanish colonial narratives later painted. Let's say archaeological evidence from the Butuan region, from the Laguna copperplate inscription dated 900 CE from gold artifacts in Surigao, and from Chinese trade records, all point to organized polities with maritime reach. The Laguna copperplate alone, inscribed in a blend of Old Malay, Sanskrit, and Old Javanese, reveals a sophisticated legal and trade culture predating European contact by centuries. Really centuries. Stop. Consider this image. A copper plate, thin as a leaf, buried in mud near the mouth of the Pasig River, carrying words from a world that supposedly never existed. Found in 1989, the same year that 12-year-old boy in Manila learned his ancestors were primitive. The timing is almost cruel. Now certain Filipino scholars and cultural advocates have proposed that Ayutha could refer to a polity in the Visayas or Mindanao region. The argument rests on several pillars: phonetic resemblance to local place names, the documented maritime capability of ancient Filipino communities, the presence of trade goods, gold, and cultural artifacts suggesting contact between the Philippine archipelago and the Korean peninsula, mediated through extensive Southeast Asian trade networks that linked port to port across thousands of nautical miles. No single piece of evidence is conclusive. Honesty demands that acknowledgement. There is no inscription in Gaia that says the princess came from Mindanao. There is no Philippine archaeological site labeled Ayutha in pre-colonial script. The connection remains circumstantial, tantalizing, and fiercely debated. But the absence of proof is not proof of absence, and the reason this debate burns with such intensity has less to do with a Korean princess and everything to do with what was erased. Let me tell you another story, a different thread. In 1973, a Filipino collector named Cecilio Pedro acquired a golden artifact from a farmer in Surigao del Sur. The piece, later studied and authenticated, turned out to be part of a massive trove of gold items dating back to the 10th century or earlier. The craftsmanship rivaled anything produced in contemporary Java or Srivijaya. Delicate filigree, sophisticated alloying techniques. These were not trinkets. They were the output of a culture that understood metallurgy at a level colonial historians never credited to the archipelago. The Surigao treasure sat in relative obscurity for decades. When portions of it were eventually exhibited at the Ayala Museum and later studied by researchers, including those at the Field Museum in Chicago, the reaction was stunned silence, followed by a slow reevaluation. A civilization capable of producing such gold did not spring from nowhere. Trade routes connected the Philippines to China, to the Malay world, to India, and yes, to Korea. The sea was not a barrier. The sea was a highway. And along that highway, goods, languages, belief systems, and people traveled in both directions. A princess sailing from an island kingdom to the Korean coast is not fantasy within this framework. Well, within the web of maritime Southeast Asia, it is plausible. So why do Asian textbooks remain silent? The answer is layered, and none of the layers are simple conspiracy. Colonial historiography, primarily Spanish and American, framed the Philippines as a blank slate awaiting Western civilization. That framing became the foundation of the educational system. Textbooks were written by people trained in that tradition, the narrative calcified. Meanwhile, Korean historiography had its own priorities. The Gaia Confederacy, eventually absorbed by the Silla dynasty, occupied a complicated place in Korean national memory. The story of Heo Hwang Ok served Korean identity narratives, and the Indian connection was reinforced by diplomatic interests in the 20th century. Nobody in Seoul had a political reason to champion a Philippine connection. Nobody in Manila had the institutional power to demand one. Neglect, not malice. Bureaucratic inertia, not cover-up. The machinery of education grinds slowly, and it grinds along the grooves already carved. But the fans changed everything. Wait. Fans? Yes. This is where the story takes its strangest turn, because the rediscovery of pre-colonial Philippine history did not come from universities first. The spark didn't ignite in a lecture hall. The fire started online, in forums, in YouTube comment sections, in Facebook groups where Filipinos shared fragments of research with each other like smuggled letters. A generation raised on the internet began asking questions their textbooks never invited. They found the Laguna copper plate. They found the Boxer Codex, a 16th century manuscript illustrating pre-colonial Filipino clothing, weaponry, and social hierarchy. They found the Butuan Balangay boats, actual ancient watercraft excavated and carbon dated to the 4th century. And they found the Samguk Yusa reference. The cultural impact was volcanic. Artists began illustrating pre-colonial warriors and datus with historical accuracy. Game developers started building worlds rooted in authentic Philippine mythology. Musicians sampled ancient Kulintang rhythms. Tattoo artists revived batak, the traditional Kalinga tattooing practice, and people flew across oceans to receive marks their great-great-grandmothers once wore. Incidentally, the Ayutha question became a symbol, not because anyone could prove beyond doubt that Heo Huang-ok sailed from the Philippines, but because the question itself cracked open a sealed room. Behind the door was a civilization, complex, creative, connected to the wider world, and that civilization deserved to be seen. Fan theories proliferated. Some were rigorous, some were wild, some drew connections between Baybayin, the pre-colonial Filipino script, and scripts found across maritime Asia. Others mapped trade routes and showed how a vessel could navigate from Butuan to the Korean coast following established currents. A few overreached, claiming vast empires and global influence without sufficient evidence. The community policed itself, debated fiercely, corrected each other. There's a catch. The phenomenon was messy, alive, real. And here lies the deepest layer of this story, the reason a Korean royal record mentioning an ancient kingdom can shake the emotional foundations of millions of people alive today. Identity is not a luxury. Knowing where you came from, knowing your ancestors built something worthy of remembrance, that knowledge shapes how you move through the present. Colonial education didn't just erase history. Colonial education amputated a sense of self. The recovery of pre-colonial narratives, even contested ones, even partially proven ones, functions as a kind of healing. Interesting fact. The Ayutha Debate, whether it ends in confirmation or remains an open question, has already accomplished something no textbook revision could. The debate made people look, search, read, argue, care. Korean descendants of the Gimhae Kim clan, numbering in the millions, trace their lineage through Heo Huang-ok. Some have traveled to the Philippines seeking cultural connection. Some have traveled to India for the same reason. The princess, real or legendary, has become a bridge between peoples who might never have spoken to one another. A bridge built from a single word in a medieval manuscript. Ayutha. That 12-year-old boy in Manila, the one who learned his ancestors had no civilization, grew up. Many versions of him grew up. They became teachers, researchers, filmmakers, writers. They began rewriting the curriculum, not with invented glory, but with documented evidence. The National Museum of the Philippines expanded its pre-colonial galleries. Universities introduced courses on pre-colonial Philippine societies. The conversation shifted, slowly, imperfectly, but it shifted. And the Korean records remain, untouched, patient. They mention a kingdom that no standard Asian textbook includes, and that silence is louder than any chapter ever written. The silence asks us to look again at what we think we know, to hold our inherited narratives up to the light, to admit that the map we were given might be missing entire continents of meaning. Nobody told me about any of this, not a single teacher, not one textbook. I found it sideways late at night, reading something I had no business reading. And once I saw it, I could not unsee it. The name sat there in the Korean text, quiet as a seed buried in ancient soil, waiting for someone to notice it had already begun to grow.